Welcome back. We're glad you're watching Morning Express on this Monday, the 9th of December, 7:04 a.m. it is, and it's time for The Way It Is with the Benji likes to call,
on bad boys.
The big brown bad boys. I don't know why he's
quadruple B's, yes.
Quadruple B's.
Yes.
He's not big.
He's a big guy. Trust me.
Okay, let's talk about the stories, of course, that have been dominating our news headlines. Big is Nelson Mandela, of course, and a good place to begin.
Yes, certainly a good place to begin. I actually got the news from you, Sophia. I was just getting ready early on Friday to head out to Eldoret. Shouts out to the beautiful people in Eldoret. We had a good weekend, but a really somber one. A lot of people are touched and are thinking a lot around the demise of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is many things to many people, especially, and Tony will allow me to say this, in a continent, in South Africa being a good partner and brother of a country like Kenya, in a continent defined many times by excuses and self-mutilation. Here comes a gentleman, not greedy, not self-toward, not power-hungry, a man that has laid down pretty much everything, including basically his own life, his own comfort, his family, and what have you. Personally, I read Long Walk to Freedom in 2001. I was at the time just doing some introspection and wanting to learn more about the world. But I must thank my friend Sonia Likimani, then just a young lady, who really recommended that to understand Africa, Sophia, you had to understand the struggle of South Africa, all of the different interlinking things, and the book helped me a lot. And just as I wind up, one of the most touching parts of that book for me, and at many points in that book you will actually find yourself shedding tears. Nelson Mandela explains how, as a lawyer, he kept going in and out of jail as he struggled in the courts and whatnot against the apartheid system. And one day, when he had just been released from jail the day before, he showed up at his small daughter's classroom in school at about 11 o'clock, and she was very excited to see him. She was young, I think about a 4 or 5 year old, and she just jumped at him, and as soon as he hugged her, she then immediately pulled back. And he realized that for the child, psychologically, she was happy to see daddy, but then she also realized, as a young baby, that as much as her joy was real, in no time he would be gone again. And so he realized this was the toll that this was having on his family, the fact that his schedule was so unpredictable, his arrests were so unpredictable, and also how long he would be away was also very unpredictable. And it really hurt him to see that expressed in the mind and the heart of a child. Very touching.
Well, I would want to say from the onset that one should start by extending condolences to Madiba's family. One also should extend condolences to the people of South Africa and the people of Africa as a whole. And of course, after you've seen since the death, the whole world is mourning a man who died as he had lived. And I think Madiba's hallmark will always be humility. And that because he was a man with a lot of humility, he was able to transform himself without hurting the brand Madiba or Mandela. Sophia, if you remember, there was the argument in the early years of fighting apartheid as to whether there should be an armed struggle or it should be a peaceful rebellion against the oppressive system of apartheid. And the ANC actually became an armed struggle wing, part of the struggle in South Africa. And in fact, when Madiba came here to Kenya, he was completely dumbfounded because he thought Dedan Kimathi should have been a hero because of leading the armed struggle of the Mau Mau against the colonial British then. So whereas the West has really come out in the forefront, everybody wants to own Madiba. Everybody wants to feel part of him. Truly his history was one of fighting oppression and repression. And perhaps he will remain for Africa the most important symbol of hope, that you can actually defy injustice, you can stand up and win. And whereas a lot of people are now talking about what he's done by raising money for AIDS, by helping internationally South Africa's rugby bid and many other things. People forget to say that he actually won the injustice by actually being unconditionally released after 27 years of draconian injustice. He actually walked out of prison a free man. So that is something that should be said. And Sophie, if you just give me a second, I just wanted to share with Kenyans 3 statements that Mandela has made. He has said, and I quote him, "It is always seems impossible until it is done. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed towards the sun and one's feet moving forward. There are many dark moments when my faith in humanity was sorely tested, but I could and would not give up to despair, the way that lays defeat to death." So I think as he is passed away, he never thought that death was a defeat. He thought that it was just a process in his long struggle.
Okay, and of course, for many, this is a celebration of life. In fact, when the South African president was breaking the news, he said, as much as we knew it was coming, and in essence, and many analysts have said that when he was hospitalized for a very long time, that served as a preparation, a really good preparation for everybody, because at that time, most people thought that was it. But he didn't. There was some... It has been described as a death watch, even journalists just being there, but it didn't happen. But now that it has happened, more people now just taking it in, saying, let him rest, a celebration of life. But as you've said, now what we are seeing is a lot of those pictures being posted, those people who had the opportunity to meet him, and the world leaders, the convergence that we'll see in South Africa, and presenting also a security crisis for them, of course, just as a country. But it will be one of those pictures and scenes that is not one you see every other day.
Yes, certainly, Sophia. For me, it prepared me for the release, if you may, for the release, for the acceptance that Mandela will be no more. Frankly speaking, I didn't think, just based on how the news was going, and I followed this very closely, that he would hit the 95th mark. And in typical fashion, he did, and he bought some extra time. I mean, you have to agree, he was extremely weak, not seen in public anymore, not able to even speak, to project his voice. And one thing I know is that when you're up there in age, the body is left with pretty much nothing else, to fight any infections and what have you. And so he bought another 5-6 months. It was great for the world. I remember a lot of when he was in hospital, a lot of the prayers and the vigils for him, just to see the kind of affection, as you say, that can cause 4 US presidents on short notice like this. You can imagine to be on the ground in Africa, President Clinton, President Obama, President Bush, President Jimmy Carter at the same time, and many, many, many other world leaders. It's very interesting to me. At the hotel on Saturday, I just, was flipping through the channels, at about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was very interesting to me, Tony. You go to the Chinese, Mandela. I'm telling you, and then you go to the Arabian channels, Mandela, and then the English, the British, CNN at the same time. Look at a man, it's true, a man that in essence has unified the world, and who there's no dispute. Even though he's a politician, there's not a single dispute. And we're not saying he's an angel, but we're saying that, as Tony said, that he left prison standing, a strong man. I'd like to add also a decent man.
And
so many lessons.
And also,
so many lessons.
Benji, one of the things that actually this reminds me of in modern funerals, I would compare this to perhaps John Paul II. What's going to descend on South Africa starting this week is going to be so massive, not just because of the presidents that are there and the heads of government, but also people are flying from all over the world. Some are movie stars, some are ordinary people. It is just something that has touched the whole world. And then you can imagine we're in the television age. So you can imagine like that of like the Princess Diana. She became a world phenomenon, and her funeral, I remember sitting glued onto the television through the whole of the things because of the greatness. But I want to say this, Sophia, there would be no tribute to Nelson Mandela greater than this. This gentleman, when he became president, the first thing he does, he invites all the wives of former presidents of South Africa. Some of them were widowed, except de Klerk's wife.
Yeah.
All of whom their husbands were oppressors.
Yes.
They had been the captains of apartheid, and he calls them to lunch. And one lady who couldn't make it, he decided to drive over to her house to kind of have lunch with her.
Yeah.
And then he had lunch with his prosecutor, the one who sent him into jail for 30 years.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I forgive you, we need to move forward. So this is not just somebody who was an icon because it was an accident. I believe there was a very deep part of Mandela that was very analytical and that had a foresight and a plan.
Yes.
I think it was a very deliberate. He knew Bland Madiba, he knew Bland Mandela. He was able to use that iconic name to be able to break down the Berlin Wall within South Africa.
Yeah.
And he was able to go to his enemies, and his enemies would reach out and shake his hand. And I think that itself inspired so much.
Yes.
And let's not forget, he went to the presidency for one term.
And he decided to live it.
He just left the term.
And amazing, one of those great lessons, and I want us to go into that a little bit, Benji, as you chip in, because now what we're hearing from leaders, even as they were paying tribute, is that we must learn from him, we must, follow in his example, follow his steps. But really, not very many will be willing in such situations to do what Mandela did. For you, what are those key lessons that must at least be considered for leadership, even here in
Good
Kenya?
question, Sophia. Nelson Mandela embodies and personifies the definition of perseverance, of patience, of resilience, of fortitude, humility, and there are big lessons, particularly for Kenya, because our country is misguided in a few ways, where our culture has allowed us to think, and I'll challenge you to give me one leader of the stature of Mandela. We have defined our politics to be about trickery, deception, manipulation, saying this when you mean that.
Self-enrichment.
Absolutely. I mean, self-aggrandizement and the pursuit of power, many times for power's sake. And I know someone like Tony, who's been in this, struggle in his own way, in many ways, involved in very many ways, will take a seat and look back and say, wait a minute, what kind of leadership or what kind of politics have we even had where many a time we've talked about liberating the people of Kenya, but it turns out to be about something else.
Actually,
about
Benji,
corruption.
I fully agree with you on
about
that.
business.
In fact, I fully agree with you, because I think part of the biggest part of Mandela's legacy, and I hope they will be able to cover it during the funeral, is something that Benji has just touched on the outside. Mandela was seen going into prison as a communist. He was seen to have leanings of ideological persuasion that were left. In fact, the African National Congress was seen as a party that will nationalize gold, diamond reserves, banks, and so on. So the ANC doctrine was actually a very scary doctrine for business. But one of the things that Mandela did when he came out is he engaged business. And they had very, very many talks. And actually, in his first cabinet, he presented a moderate position that was able to accommodate business and accommodate, if you like, what the ANC was seeing as years of black oppression. And what came out of Mandela's change of heart was a leader who was not afraid to actually sit down and listen and turn the corner so that South Africa could go forward. So if you're asking me what are the problems I've seen having been near power, we're having this problem currently now, just looking at how the country's been run. My question is the greatness of President Kenyatta shall be his capacity to listen when he's wrong. And his ability to say, on this issue, I was wrong, and I think this is the right position. And if Mandela, in his greatness and with his image, was able to do it with humility, who are you not to do so? And I think, for me, that's the question. As all these heads of state, fly in these aircrafts to South Africa, etc., and they actually take this opportunity, could they actually reflect as to whether or not they have ever put the country themselves or themselves before themselves? And the only way to do that is not just to be have humility, but actually to change your mind when you are wrong. Accept you're human. And that's why we all agree in Mandela's humanity. When he was wrong, he said he was wrong, and he actually acted in the right way.
Or not even to pretend to have humility, because that's the other thing is we don't want now to get into, Sophia, the politics of trickery, where people now will want to act like as if they were Mandela. People will want to, deceive, to basically be very non-genuine, just to, I guess, trick and con the masses. But having said that, allow me to also be the bearer of bad news, in a sense. And from this whole week and the whole Mandela thing, guess what? Kenya at 50 will be reduced to a footnote, because the celebrations were supposed to be a big thing, and now they will be eclipsed. And that's at least something that Kenyans need to know and know early.
No, we will get to that, because even before Mandela passed on,
the momentum has just gone.
What was there?
Yeah, but so if you allow me, just
there?
Before we to discuss Kenya at 50,
we'll go to Kenya at 50.
Could we also celebrate Mandela's last wife, Dr. Gracia Machel?
Yeah.
Beautiful woman, intelligent.
Absolutely incredible. In fact, at the family level, once we remove all this political analysis and this man that was owned by all of the world, Mandela at the end was a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a family man. And because of the turbulence of this political life he had lived, he was never able to settle down the family and kind of bring it together. Gracia Machel was able single-handedly to actually give the final years of this great African icon some family and I would say comfort that no other comfort can give you. And so Mandela rested around the people that loved him the most, around his family, the people he loved the most. So let's also celebrate the dignity and decorum with which the Mandela family has acted. They have not been controversial in the media, neither have they been controversial about this wild event with great media interest, and certainly head over shoulders the role of his wife, Gracia Machel.
Allow me to briefly remind the country, and Tony was involved in this process, because part of our job here, you know, when we do analysis, is as much as we want to be very nice and talk pretty, we also have to give Kenyans the root core of stuff, you know, real substance. And during the negotiations prior to the National Accord, as you remember, Gracia Machel was part of the delegation at Serena. And when there was problems for Kofi Annan and people were going around, it was said that a hardliner had pretty much insulted, you know, Kofi Annan, and the talks had broken down and what have you. And I have it from a very good source that Miss Machel, you know, put her foot down and she said, look, young lady, you are, you know, putting a whole country in turmoil, and people are fighting every day and we're trying to move forward, and you're being a hardliner. Some of us are real women. I've been married to 2 presidents. You ain't seen nothing yet. And so that has to be understood, that for a lady like this, you can imagine, who brought comfort to Mandela, I think became president at age 74, and it was now, you know, in his 90s, going onto a century. This is no lady of mean feet. This is someone who is deep, someone who is obviously very strong in every sense of the word. And so we must thank her for caring for him, for, like as Tony says, having the hand of comfort, the gentleness and what have you. But that's not to say she was a softie. As gentle as she was, if it came to putting her foot down, like any strong woman, she was not a softie.
And for South Africa, finally, gentlemen, we must bring this to an end to move on to the other things we must discuss this morning. What does this portend for South Africa? This is a man, at some point, analysts were worried that if he ever passed on, then, you know, he was the glue that held South Africa together. But of course, now it has stabilized. Things are fine. Many will be optimistic that everything will still hold, even though he's left. But in terms of the leadership going forward and lessons being learned from him for South Africans themselves and the world, even as they converge there this week.
Well, I just want to say very quickly that history should not forget Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and the many people that Mandela worked with to achieve this dream. He was very good at working together with great
he talks
leaders.
About it a lot. Teamwork.
Teamwork within the ANC. My worry right now, under the presidency of Zuma, for example, we're beginning to see a very fragmented ANC. If you remember, Thabo Mbeki was actually thrown out of office by a party coup. And there has also been a coup that's going on between Zuma and the youth leader, Malema and so forth. So the question is, will ANC continue to be the visionary party for the poor, whose social democratic agenda was very well known and understood? Because Madiba really believed in the solidarity of the people, the rich helping the poor, and the old being taken care of the young. Some very basic values of social democracy. Are these now being seen in the Zuma years? Many of the newspapers in South Africa, hither to this death, have been portraying the Zuma regime as capital hungry. The issue of quick rich get rich schemes, whether it is through the presidency or those close to it. So the greater challenge for South Africa is whether they are going to use the Madiba brand and the goodwill that he enjoys here and throughout the world to be able to actually bring down South Africa, not only to a working democracy, but an equitable society.
Okay, excellent. Well put. Benji.
Let me just say that, first of all, of course, Mandela, in a sense, the challenge now for the president of South Africa is he obviously makes Zuma look bad, you know, because these are huge shoes to fill, because he sets the standards so high. South Africa will obviously have to introspect and seek new leadership. The leadership of Julius Malema, as controversial as has been, is an interesting one. Suffice to say that if you look at it very carefully, as an analyst, as a student of history, you see some of the commonalities between Malema's, you know, fiery stance, because there's a misnomer out there that everything was all nice and pretty and kosher with Mandela. Oh no, absolutely not. Mandela was a tough fighter, a boxer, a resilient guy, a guy that could take very, very high risks and that could, in essence, rattle the system, which is why, regrettably, his organization was you know, labeled by the likes of Thatcher and former Vice President Dick Cheney as a terrorist organization. And so, as South Africa looks forward, the leadership of the likes of Julius Malema and others has to be analyzed a little more. I think it is very possible a new leader will rise up. Whether that leader is Zuma, I think not, even though there are really some good things to be said about, you know, Zuma. It's just that he's had so many, you know, PR missteps and, you know, as you know, all the many different wives and the contradictory, you know, stances on many different things, including HIV. But having said that,
and the huge mansion that was making
exactly, and that's why
if you have so many wives, you don't need a small one.
But on a serious note, I think as we conclude, we as Kenyans and Africans have got to thank Nelson Mandela and the South African people in a continent defined by mediocrity, you know, defined by corruption, defined by all the ills you can think of. Here came a leader that cannot be accused of having stolen land, of having stolen money, of using his position and what have you. And if you look at his history and look at one of his final speeches, where after 5 years, when you're saying, "Don't call me, I'll call you," and what have you, and you're saying, you know, one of these days, don't be surprised if you find me on a street corner. I mean, that is not the language of a guy who has amassed wealth in 5 years. That is someone who is really putting the country first and saying, I'm an ordinary citizen now, and you know, it's really, really different from all the different cases that we've seen.
I'll be very quick about it. Sophie, your program will not be complete in remembering that Nelson Mandela took the biggest risk of his life when he decided to speak to the apartheid regime in secret.
Correct.
Beginning the dismantling process of apartheid South Africa. That, in my view, will be his greatest legend. When the timing he took to decide, now I will engage the apartheid government. And from then on, the democratic new South Africa was ushered in through a new constitution.
Excellent. Gentlemen, in 2 days, there's just Tuesday and Wednesday, Kenya at 50. You've mentioned something about, of course, this Mandela whole thing, the celebration of life will overshadow everything. But even before that, one would expect such a milestone, such a celebration would bring about a lot of buzz and excitement. There should be so many, you know, branded merchandise going around, everybody just having this excitement, this you know, excitement and spirit around the country should be huge. But there's been none of that. It's just 2 days to go. It's a big one. Sophia, who has fallen short?
Let's have some real talk. Let's have some real talk. Maybe it is apt that this is so. I have people I work with, partners and friends of mine, that are part of this Kenya at 50. I have received complaints. In fact, in the past week, and I asked the guys that complained, knowing that we have these platforms in media, why didn't they even come to us earlier? And there are big professional organizations in this country, and Tony, you can check this out using your different, you know, resources and watchdogs like Mars Group, for example, that have pulled out because what they've told me is this thing has turned into an opportunity to make money. 2 billion in 2 days. What the government has conceded is that the expenditure was something like 500 million. But I'm told it's much more than that, just as it is with many other things. If you look closely at the reports on the standard gauge railway, for example, and we're not sitting here to bash the government, at 1.2 trillion, you've got to ask yourself, I'm told there's about 400 billion loose that will just be eaten in there. And so this is really unfortunate. There's no momentum on this thing. You wonder how the planning and the executing is being done. And so, as usual, we are a nation that has put personal interest first. Yes, Kenyans are hardworking. Yes, the opportunities are few and far in between, but everything has become an opportunity for self-propelling, for self-advancement, to do business. And so this Kenya at 50 at the least just looks completely discoordinated, completely, just out of whack. But behind the scenes, you can be sure a few players and their relatives are just going to make money
feels
and
that
walk
it's
away.
not happening because some people are busy stealing the money.
Yeah, because they're missing the point.
Because they're missing the point. Others have argued that ICC in a big way, the discussion around, of course right now things have slowed down a bit with the adjournments and all, but took the attention even of the government, and all the effort and attention was on that everybody forgot, oh, by the way, the country is turning 50, and to focus on the same.
I think that's a smaller element of a bigger issue. Kenya has just come out of a very bruising presidential competition, where the country literally was 50-50. We avoided a runoff in this country with a mere 8,000 votes. So the country voted almost on a 50-50 basis. So the country was highly politicized during the election. It then led into creation of a new order like the Senate and Parliament and the rest, which have spent the past 6 months fighting for supremacy and power. Then you've got the governors who have also come into office. Again, they have been in battle with the executive, for devolved power, devolution, and so forth. So I would say that the first 6 months of this presidency or this government's tenure has been with putting out fires. Whether it is all the matters that come out in Parliament, whether it is the matters that deal with the media, whether it's the matters that deal with that polarization. So I think the planners of Kenya at 50 had thought that if we give the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga a role to open something at Imara Daima, or you give our President retired Moi a role to open some infrastructure project, and get President Kibaki retired also to go and give some speech, somehow there will be some nationalism. But what has happened is that although that is an icing on the cake, there has not been real healing among the competing political forces within the country. So it was not a real coming together, if you like. It's like retired president sitting down, smiling, and I remember that picture, famous picture with the president and retired Prime Minister Raila Odinga hit the headlines, and they were smiling and one hand on top of the other, etc. But if that had been really adhesed with their people and their supporters, then you would feel more Kenyans involved. I would also want to come into this issue of accountability, transparency, and again the lack of command. The problem that we had at Westgate was similar to the problem we're having at Kenya at 50. There were so many security agencies, nobody taking charge of what's going on. So even here, you've got strong voices from State House who are handling some part of it, a cabinet secretary who doesn't know where to cross the line and not cross the line for sports and culture, other organizations and so on. So I believe after the audit of Kenya at 50, you're going to find not only was there money lost, not because it was desired that it is lost, but because coordination, accountability, and all those things that are important in public spending are put in place. And I think there'll be a blame game, and people will blame each other for why it never actually came out the way it is. Having said all that, the death of Madiba is nobody's planning. Certainly that has removed a lot of fire from the belly.
But there was no fire. That's the point.
Exactly.
There was never fire.
And the little that was there is gone.
Yes, and I think also because the country was so polarized on the ICC matter that maybe people don't feel all Kenyan all the time.
But wouldn't this have been the perfect opportunity for President Uhuru Kenyatta, saying that he'll be doing midnight, if the plans still hold as we've been told, 11th at the Uhuru Gardens, hoisting the flag and all the things that his father did 50 years ago. His name, Uhuru, independence, wouldn't he have used this as great, even political capital, in terms of just bringing that and helping? Because it's meant to be what's time to call the unifier in chief. This would have been perfect to build
Sophia,
on that.
Sophia, you're raising very pertinent points, and let me answer you this way. He probably will. The president will probably go. I mean, Jubilee and the TNA machinery, etc. I don't know if you read Abdullahi yesterday, Ahmed Nasir, and Professor Kagwanja. I mean, these guys are adept at running the whole, PR thing and propaganda and building the political machine and whatnot. So he'll probably do that, and he'll do it pretty effectively. The problem, as I see it, Sophia, is the fact that even as we go into these celebrations, and the realities in this country are that and I've just come from the countryside. The economy is not growing. There's anxiety in a real fashion, from Mama Mboga to the transport sector and what have you. Cost of doing business, cost of living, and all those things in between. And now when you add the anxieties and the unknown unknowns, the ICC, how is it going to go? Are we going to, etc.? There's a general feeling, and I'm not the bearer of bad news, that the challenges that were there in 1963, ironically, are exactly intact today. Look at the crisis we have now with the debate, the huge debate on devolution of healthcare.
The strike that's looming.
Yes, a looming strike, you can imagine, and a looming strike in a country where if you come out of Nairobi, you have absolutely non-adequate staffing out in the countryside, in the counties, all right? Training is an issue. Retention of these doctors is still another issue. And you have a situation also where somebody getting an injury in Kinangop is still today referred to Kenyatta Hospital in Nairobi. So a lot to be done, but we have lost a lot of time in several of the regimes. We have not been able to conquer these challenges. Therefore, a lot of the things that we'll be celebrating would in essence just be very superficial and just for the sake of it. But I think
there is also another problem in Africa, and particularly in this country,
Kenya.
We are coming into the issue of the imperial presidency, something that had died with the first constitution, that everybody is looking wrongly so at what President Kenyatta shall do. It's not about Uhuru Kenyatta leading Kenya toward 50. It is about having great role models, people who inspire Kenyanism and are part of our society. If you go to the United States, for example, Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, it brings out so very much in terms of the American history. And you go to the greater presidents who have been there, Lincoln and so forth. So that whenever even Obama is speaking, he rallies America around the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, what is done by JFK. There's so many great people who have achieved so much, walking on the moon, etc., etc., a feeling that being America is being great. And I feel that in this country there is too much emphasis on politicians. Who is the president, who is the deputy, and nobody else seems to matter. It reminds me when Wangari Maathai was appointed Assistant Minister for Environment, when the world has seen that she was the top lady to get Africa Nobel Peace Prize.
It was interesting to see Kalonzo attend when she was being honored,
You know what I mean?
As her boss.
As her boss.
And today people like Wangari Maathai's memory should be at the center of the Kenya at 50. Our heroes, the people who have, Kipchoge Keino, the guys who won our first gold medals, the people who did the Kennedy airlift, Tom Mboya, who died a great man, played a major role in writing the economic paper of 69. The guys who actually made this country great. So I think what happens in this nation is that when you stop being in leadership, somehow you're put in the back burner. When you stop having been in the limelight, somehow we forget and we do not actually carry those memories forward. And I feel for our children, Sophia, because you in your business have the advantage of knowing some of these things. Some of people are learning about Madiba today. But what actually do people know of the greatness of all the Kenyan leaders that put life and limb ahead of their lives in the 60s up to now? How did we get independent?
It's actually worse than that, Tony. I'll just go a step further and say, with all the attacks on NGOs and media and what have you, you would imagine the kind of risks a young guy like John Allen Namu takes, Muhammad Ali, and all these other different reporters to bring the real story, to tell it in a meaningful way so that it connects with, somebody sitting somewhere in Moyale. All right? And now, what do? We demonize these people, and that's typical in this country. You call activists mad men and mad women. Wangari Maathai was a divorcee and a mad woman. You then pass legislation, in an underhanded way to send them to jail, like he was sent to jail in August of 1999 as a journalist, to give them punitive fines, as happened with the case of Biwott and what have you. And now, as you've seen, basically sending the chilly message that, for example, the media bill that came with the memorandum forbids, hidden cameras, with the likely fine of 20 million shillings for somebody who earns maybe 70,000 shillings to 200,000 shillings. So easily the company feels we can't afford this kind of thing. And so rather than do the right thing and stand behind people of courage and meaning and sensible stuff. And I won't be shocked if they go even after analysis. They say, what right do these people have to come and talk about the real things as they are?
And Benji will be
what we do.
Yes.
And I'll be so ready for them. And I'll be so ready for them. But seriously, you can see where I'm going with this.
And that's why
you punish the good, and then you will have all the biggest tyrants and all the biggest,
I want us to move on to another thing, Benji, because you mentioned something very important, the issues that we have as a country, very many, and the challenges, but those will always be there. I don't think there's a point, as a country, there will be perfection. But in terms of preparedness for this event and just bringing that excitement and buzz, we all agree the team has failed. The team that was given the mandate to organize and make sure Kenyans are rallied around this have failed. But it is coming up Thursday. We'll hear from the president. What message do you think is key right now? What does he need to focus on in his speech? What do you expect to hear that at a time as like this? It's significant. It's a milestone. At 100, many of people now will not be there.
Sophia, you've actually hit the nail on the head. The president must first of all become president of Kenya. He must become a political. Move himself from being a president leading the Jubilee coalition at this moment in time, but leading the Kenyan nation. Recognize the sacrifices, as I told you, Awins Kodek, Degama Pinto, Tom Mboya, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. There were many people, his father, Jomo Kenyatta, the people who did what they did in what I call the first liberation. Then there was a second liberation in this country, the Kenneth Matibas, the Martin Shikuku, the Paul Muites, the Raila Odingas, the James Orengos, the second liberation, Timothy Njoya, and so forth, Wangari Maathai, involved in the second liberation that saw the clamor for another constitution. And then it came to this issue of a Kenya passing the 2010 constitution in the first non-violent constitutional coup d'etat in the world. Most constitutions are born of blood. Kenya should be heartily proud. It, in fact, was an impossible task to pass a constitution in peacetime. And throughout history, that is a cap on the feather of every Kenyan. So if you rally constitutionalism, fidelity to the law, upholding the values and the things that we have in this constitution, and then if you are the president, like Nelson Mandela, say you are wrong when you are wrong. So when you are speaking these 50 years, tell the media that you are going to remove this draconian punitive law that is unconstitutional. It breaches section 33 and 34. Let you be a reaching out president. Let the 50 years be marked by humility and by statesmanly acts that defy your advisors, but will go into history in order to make Kenya a democratic and a wonderful country to live in.
Benji, before you move on.
The president has got to shun being a captive of Jubilee. He's got to shun the politics of belittling. For example, I saw him the other day saying, and he's just now gotten into this. He's just now gotten into this habit, because before Uhuru has been very restrained and very cautious. Especially since he's become president. And I've been to several events where he said, I could have said some more, but I will not. And now he says, it is William who actually reads papers. Alikuwa ananiambia sahi mambo ya magazeti. Me, I don't read papers, and papers will come. Now the next day we'll tutafunga nyama and what have you. What happens as leaders when you start to belittle the media? We are going down a very dangerous slope, because what you're doing is taunting the media and turning them out to be fools of some sort. Whereas if you respected the media even when you disagree with them, it would be much better for you, for your credibility, for your respect of institutions and what have you. And so you can imagine in very short order, the media obviously is under siege. NGOs, you can see how the fight has been, and the judiciary at the same time. All the talk, Sophia, the president must be cognizant that there is talk in the country that is very scary. Of a return to tyranny, to single-party dictatorship, to oppression. That talk is absolutely cannot be afforded within the context, as Tony says, of a new constitution. All we have to do is embrace this constitution, live its very spirit and letter, implement it faithfully, and the president will be fine. So let him talk about constitutionalism, but lastly, let Uhuru Kenyatta not say anything that he doesn't mean. What we want there is not platitudes and pep talk. We need the leader to say, this is my plan, this is how I'm going to do it, take it or fail. And of course, not too much fear on ICC and being on the defensive.
Okay.
I think my last thing on that one is that in order to be fair, just to be fair to the president,
Yes.
I think he can also earmark the great infrastructure projects and development projects that have been ongoing and that will give hope to the people that there is much coming about.
Okay.
I'm very excited about what's going to happen at the airport in rail modernization and so forth. So I think also part of his speech should also capture what was done with Thika Road, the improving infrastructure where he was in Eldoret as you drive up the roads, and actually making Kenya safer in terms of security should be something that he mentioned.
But all those are nothing if people can't eat.
And that is why I say security, both food and personal.
And speaking of security, we will go back to what's happening also in Jubilee, URP. We've been hearing some of these conversations about what Ruto is saying. But let's go to insecurity and what we've seen unfold in Moyale. Unfortunate that 10 days inter-clan conflict, KDF now on the ground to deal with this. But it's sad that such situations unfold and are allowed to continue for such a long time before then, we see any kind of coming in of the government or the security forces to act. And is it because, in a sense, you feel, because if this was happening in Nairobi, yes, the kind of reaction that would happen like this, but it's allowed to fester for such a long time. People are dying, people are feeling unsafe in their own country, fleeing some to Ethiopia.
I'm sorry to say that the minute I heard the security chief say that there's no problem in Moyale is the minute I knew there's a problem in Moyale. Exactly. Because they said everything is calm, there are no clashes. A few months ago, the governor of one of those counties was giving a press conference to the media, you might be familiar with this, while he was in Ethiopia. What you're seeing is incompetence of the highest order. What you're seeing is a discoordinated attempt at trying to manage security apparatus without internalizing and harmonizing the different arms, the police, law enforcement, the army, and the intelligence. Because typically, especially after Baragoi, you should be able to see these things coming and to countenance these things. And so what you have is a machinery that is ineffective to the extent that it is only reactive, yet it drains much of the public purse. Because as the president himself said the other day, the conduits for security, especially in his office, because a lot of these things are run from OP, is where money is eaten. So I think he'll have to do major shakeups. I think it's unacceptable at the 50-year mark that some Kenyans still refer to where they stay. If you travel and you come from Nairobi and they say, how is Kenya? All right, so the allocation of resources has been wanting. That can be cured again by the new constitution, but also a complete breakdown in law and order, a complete breakdown in security. It's unacceptable, and the president must start to hold people to account. Does
this feel like the forgotten Kenya, that it's so far away? Because Mandera today, Moyale, Turkana, Wajir.
I've been to Wajir.
One of the clamors in the new constitution, Sophia, and makes this even worse, was the desire to divorce cabinet from parliament.
Right.
And it was envisaged by the architects of the new constitution that this would free cabinet secretaries, one, who are professional and capable in their dockets, but two, free them from the day-to-day politics and actually act in the best interest of Kenyans without choosing whether they have to face a re-election. So it really is worrying that with a free independent cabinet, that the cabinet secretaries are offering no leadership in their dockets. Who is the cabinet secretary in charge of Homeland Security and Interior? Who is the cabinet secretary in charge of defense? What role are they doing to give political and policy leadership to their respective security arms? What role are they playing as members of the cabinet to ensure that the president, as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, as a man in charge, is fully briefed about the problems which are there? What are they doing to deal with incompetencies, to deal with corruption, to deal with lack of action? And number three, what are they doing to show that since that constitutional amendment, that Kenya actually now has moved on to a better country because the cabinet secretary is not loyal to a constituency, whereas before the minister for security would be Michuki coming from Kagema. So you say now, oh, he's only worried about Central Kenya or dealing with the Mungiki question. But now you have got an apolitical cabinet secretary who should be serving the whole country without fear or favor. May I also say this, that we have a country where nobody is punished. for what the things that happen.
Yeah.
So when murder is taking place, nobody takes political accountability.
Yeah, we
Nobody
had the
takes
president
legal
saying that they learned the lessons.
Yes.
It was a mistake. We should forgive people when they learn lessons. That's what he said after talking about Westgate and what happened. It was botched. He admitted it was, then later went to say mistakes were made, but you forgive and you move on.
And yet they've even tried to punish the media for probing into Westgate.
Yeah.
I think for leaking the fact that looting was going on and what have you. And so if you allow, bad behavior, if you reward bad behavior, if you don't punish bad behavior, then obviously what you end up with is mediocrity, and it goes from bad to worse.
Okay.
The fact that nobody from Westgate has been punished, even with acknowledgements and whatnot.
And let's not forget, Benji,
that there was a friendly fire.
We haven't healed from the wounds of the 2007-2008 clashes.
Yeah.
When a country feels there is no security, people take law in their own hands.
Correct.
My fear is that these hotspots around the country, if there will be no government, then what will happen now? Inter-ethnic revenges will happen.
Of course.
And you remember Tanaliva Delta.
Exactly.
And that what happened there took a curfew in a country not at war to actually bring down the issue at Tanariva.
URP, some of the members there feeling they're being shortchanged in the Jubilee coalition. The deputy president coming out in public saying that, everything is fine. Is it a deputy president hiding?
I actually found myself thinking about this on my way here this morning.
Yeah.
I think that these guys are pretty smart, or what word can I use? Maybe pretty tricky. I think this has been very well choreographed.
By whom?
By the European leadership.
Okay.
That's what I personally think. I think what's happened is this. They're playing a two-pronged approach.
Okay.
What they're doing is, Ruto is obviously not happy about several things.
In the coalition?
In the coalition. For example, let me just start by clarifying this. That in the past, a vice president was an appendage of the presidency, an appointee. You just wake up in the morning and pick either Saitoti, who is the lucky one, basically. In this particular constitution, Ruto is an elected deputy president who brought millions and millions of votes. He's not someone you can kick around or even move around, because he's not an appointee.
Yes.
And so the more you look at it, and remember, these are politicians with constituencies behind, they must ask, okay, what are we getting a bang for our buck, basically, okay? And with the new structures, you've obviously heard the reports that the deputy president's office expenditure has been moved. They don't have a
roles
vote.
Transferred to the chief of staff.
Some of the roles transferred, etc. I would imagine he's obviously not happy, being an ambitious guy, being an astute politician and what have you. And so a lot of his friends are backing and breathing fire. But then he comes back publicly, all right, after they've done that, and says they shouldn't do this. We are a unity government, etc. But if you analyze what Ruto is saying in detail, he's not really saying much, because what he said yesterday was, we are not a government of Nusu Mkate. Any primary going child knows that.
Yeah.
We're not the coalition thing. We are one government. And so what he's doing is, when he's speaking that way, he's actually speaking to his boss and saying, look, there are issues, but I'm reminding you, don't do what Kina Ketera is saying you're doing, because we are, in essence,
I hold my own in this coalition.
I hold my own, and so it's a very complicated situation.
Okay.
But yes, cracks must be there.
Well, Ruto has three problems.
Yeah.
His biggest nightmare is a man called retired Prime Minister Raila Omolo Odinga. Because whereas he's very unhappy, and we'll go into his displeasure, he also knows he took a chunk of the constituency that belongs to CORD and the former Prime Minister. And he told them, I'm taking you to a safe place. I'm taking you where you are going to have a better life. And trust me, I'm your captain. And so they gave him, largely from western part of the country, that confidence and trust, and parts of the coast, that you are going to become a person who comes and takes care of our interest. So they go to the table. I can even mention you, people who are already out of the government, people like Makwere, people like Ngatana. They are not necessarily from Rift Valley, but they were part of his ship. People like Ole Kaparo, they are part of the URP. So URP is this boat with a captain who took them out and said, I'm taking you sailing to a safer place. We all know that ahead of that election, a lot of ethnicity was coming in, and very, very few people were saying, how can Uhuru inherit Kibaki? So it had raised two issues. First of all, the Kibaki administration had already been full of so-called Kibaki rights. So the civil service, the government as it stands, is heavily tilted towards the Kibaki constituency, which is similar to the Uhuru constituency. And then before then, there was the Moi constituency. Now, Moi himself has loyalists who are still in the system. Now, here you come as William Ruto. You want to take over the Moi constituency because that's your backbone.
Yeah.
Now, how do you slowly weed out the so-called Moi rights and put Ruto rights and do so properly without any breach of public order or procurement or all the rules that you have to follow to get competent people in? The other issue is then how do you deal with this tricky Kenya Kibaki constituency to give way for some of the URP people? I'm saying this because they see theirs as a 50-50 Jubilee arrangement, and they are feeling that 50-50, at least for the URP ship, has all come in. The last thing that I would like to say on this issue is that William Ruto has the most direct access to the President Uhuru Kenyatta in Kenya. There should be no dispute that should be in the media for us to discuss. If it was not driven by him, it should not exist. Because these are people who not only have a hotline to speak with each other, but meet more than once or twice a day. The fact that these matters have come out in the media,
open,
and including an attack on leading supporters of the president, not by name. People who are very key in the Kenyatta administration, being attacked by his right-hand man, Charles Kitel. Where there is smoke, there is fire.
There is fire.
And it is orchestrated, in my own view, by the deputy president, but he's doing so in order to try and save the URP ship. And in the meantime, the TNA side of the government has also got a major problem. If you look at Kajiado and Narok, who are very heavily represented in TNA in government, you will find that the cabinet secretary, interior, you will find what. So even TNA has got balances it has to do in order not to look like a party from one ethnic.
Coalitions in this country in the past have always suffered, some kind of struggle at some point, some splitting. What will happen with Jubilee in the next few years as we wind up, as you give your closing sentiments?
I am not going to be a pessimist.
Yes.
But I'll say this. The reason people don't want this talk or don't want to imagine that Jubilee would have any tensions whatsoever is simply because I can imagine a situation, because Tony, as a chief of protocol in the Prime Minister's office, this must look very familiar and sound very familiar to you, because around 2008, 6 months later, a lot of murmurs began to come out that Ruto was unhappy, ODM and what have you. And initially it was so shocking that people thought the media was being reckless and crazy. About a year after that, the reality started to dawn, and the attacks on the PM from William Ruto were devastating, to say the least. And so a few years from now, if these issues are left unchecked, you can imagine the kind of conflict that will be there between both leaders, both of them quite pretty youthful. I would tell you that it would be the highest drama. It would have the highest, rhetoric that you cannot imagine. It will be really something that you don't even want to imagine.
Will you be at the stadium on Thursday?
I am not sure. I might even be in South Africa with this guy.
Now, let me just say this. I'm very worried for the two leaders in the face of the ICC. It will be very interesting to see in January, because I call this the test case. After what happened in terms of the hybrid that was passed at the Assembly of State Parties, it will be very interesting to see whether Ruto goes and doesn't go in January, setting the stage for February, whether they go by the use of video link, etc. So that will be a very interesting time. It will also be very interesting, the evidence that will be adduced in these two cases, because these were protagonists. And if a lot of if maneno mingi itaanza kutoka wakati wa kesi hizi, na tena sasa vile siasa iko, watu wanataka kiti hapa na pale, I think next year will be an interesting one, Sophia. So we should be here 2014 and we analyze
the Jubilee,
how the marriage goes on. But
goes
one must always remember this, that they have more to lose by parting than they have to gain by staying together. You know what I mean? In other words, politically now, they cannot politically, the two Uhuru and Ruto, if they don't work it out, they will just give court the way to pass through between them.
Sophia, finally, in 30 seconds, I don't want to give credence to anything, but there are some unscrupulous characters out there that are making scurrilous, allegations in the tabloids and whatnot, that some of us, are working to destabilize the government, that we're working on the behest of embassies and high commissions and what have you. Allow me to just say that some of us, as young people, are true believers in a better Kenya. We don't do this for money. We don't do this on behalf of anybody. Nobody has sent me to sit here and espouse any views. And so the reason it's important to clarify, we are also gaining quite a bit of following on the different social media networks, and we are friends, etc. So we don't want to disappoint the people who believe that it is possible in Kenya to be young, to be smart, to believe in something, to not do everything and anything just for money. And so ignore a lot of the rubbish you see, continue focusing on the way it is and other platforms, and let's interact. I mean, a lot of college students follow this show and do their research and what have you. And Tony, do you want to disappoint them for them to find out that you're working for some high commissioner and you're here because of money? I mean, really,
I leave it to Sophie because Sophia, because this is a credible program, a credible station.
Exactly.
And Merry Christmas to all those who will not see again.
Are we coming back?
All Kenyans should
We
have a
will
wonderful.
see if there's what we'll talk on Monday. We'll talk about the celebrations. What happened
So we'll be back next Monday.
He wants to travel. We'll talk about that.
I'll be here. Let him travel, but I'll be here. So I won't say Merry Christmas just yet.
You'll say Merry Christmas.
Thank you. That's the way it is.
All right. Thank you, Benjamin Dola,
Thanks,
Tony
Sophia.
Gashoka. Thank you both.
And you look lovely today, by the way.
Don't I look lovely every other Monday?
Especially today. I think I like the colors.
You love the me too. Beautiful,
Yes,
huh?
yes.
Well,
Fantastic.
thank you.
Goodbye, Madiba, and God bless you for giving Africa so much.
Thank you, everyone, for watching, staying with us on The Way It Is right here on Morning Express. We're glad you're watching. Still ahead, we have quite lots more on the show, so you want to stay tuned. But it is time for our video of the day. And Air New Zealand partnered with Weta Workshop on a brand new Hobbit-inspired safety video. It features cameo appearances, including Sir Peter Jackson. Let's have a look.
Welcome aboard this Air Middle-earth flight. Before we set out on our journey, I would like to impart a story of safety. Even if you fly with us often, be sure to keep a sharp eye on the briefing. Make sure your belongings are hidden away in the compartments above or under the seat before you.
All travellers must keep a watchful eye on the lighted signs and follow crew instructions. If the seatbelt sign is on, sit yourself down and fasten your seatbelt quick smart.
Be sure that it's snug across your hips, though not so tight as to lose the feeling in your legs. If you're in the Sky Couch row, there are special seatbelt instructions in your seat pocket.
We recommend keeping your seatbelt fastened throughout the journey. Should you need to explore, it can always be undone.
If an oxygen mask should fall before you, simply pull down on the mask, place over your nose and mouth, and tighten by pulling the elastics on both sides. Oxygen will flow through the mask automatically. If there are young ones around you, be sure to put your mask on before helping them. Keep a sharp eye, as there may be others who need your help.
Should an emergency occur during takeoff or landing, place your hands on your head with your elbows on the outside of your thighs whilst keeping your feet flat on the floor. You can also brace yourself on the seat in front of you.
My precious.
In Business Premier, sit upright, put your hands on your knees with your knees together against the wall and your feet on the edge of the ottoman.
If you're seated in economy and premium economy, you'll find your life jacket under your seat. The Sky Couch has it in the top of the leg rest. And if you're seated in Business Premier, you'll find your life jacket here beside you. Life jackets are simple to master. Take a firm hold and rip it from the bag. Then place it over your head like so. Clip the straps together and tighten. This red tab inflates the life jacket, so only pull it once you leave the aircraft. Oh, sorry.
If you need a little more inflation, simply blow into the mouthpiece.
We shall provide life jackets for the very young, should the need arise.
There's no smoking allowed anywhere of any kind on this aircraft, as it's a fire hazard.
Should you need a light in darkness to help you find your way, the escape path lighting will lead you to an exit. If ever there were a need to evacuate, support fellow passengers who might require help. Your noble crew are now pointing out the exits.
You would be wise to know route your nearest exit could be behind you. So cast your eyes about and count the number of rows to your nearest exit. You'll find more information on the safety card in your seat pocket. Please power off all electronic devices during takeoff and landing. Electronic devices such as mobile phones can interfere with aircraft systems and must not be used in flight unless you've switched them to flight mode. And ensure that all cellular, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capability is turned off. Once switched to flight mode, all electronic devices must be turned off for takeoff and landing.
And finally, for takeoff, we ask that you place your tray table back, your leg rest down, and ensure your seat back is upright unless you're in Business Premier, where you choose your own seat back position. Check to see that your window shades are open and your armrests are lowered, and be sure to fasten your seatbelt. Once the story has concluded, your entertainment screen and remote control need to be put away for takeoff.
Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your journey. May the road rise up to meet you and your bed grow ever longer. May the sun shine warm upon you. Fly, you fools!
8:02 a.m. on this Monday, the 9th of December. We're glad you're watching Morning Express right here on KTN. Today on our question of the day, we are asking, is the government doing enough to deal with insecurity in Moyale? Is the government doing enough to deal with insecurity? That interclan conflict has been ongoing for the last 10 days. Send us your views, 22155. Tweet us at KTN Kenya, at Sophia Wanuna. The hashtag is Morning Express KTN. And ahead of our short break, we are giving out this goodie hamper, KTN. Actually, one of the things you'll find inside, quite a number of things, but one of them is this notebook, KTN notebook. Beautiful. You can always have around with you for your notes, whatever it is. It's inside there amongst other beautiful, lovely things we're giving. And the question we're asking is, in which year, what year did Nelson Mandela visit Kenya for the first time? Which year did Nelson Mandela visit Kenya? You'll get this notebook, you'll get a KTN mug, you'll get a KTN t-shirt, and lots more that are inside our hamper. This KTN goodie bag. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we still have lots more, including book review and Bangla.